Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager and an emerging people leader and thus a leadership enthusiast.
We are doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show to look at how leadership is all around us. And even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and opportunities.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers in these episodes. Today we're talking about Season 5, specifically co-leadership, creating consistency in the environment, preparing others for important conversations, conflict resolution, and emotional intelligence. Let's jump in.
Welcome to Season 5.
Woo!
Okay, so it is post Black Rainbow. The groups have been split up because Warren was on the drone. And so now we see some different kinds of leadership emerging and just kind of just different things happening. Now we're entering essentially, well, the name of the episode is Welcome to the New Apocalypse, which we are seeing some new things occurring. So what stood out to you?
I think the big one is there's always been throughout this idea where there was always like this safe haven, right, of a different town. So like with the major, or like early on in season 1, right, they were going to get to this place that was zombie free, and now you have this new America, right? That's this sort of new Mecca that everyone is slowly trying to make their way to. And you see everyone in the group is kind of sort of making their way over there. And you have Doc and Murphy who are leading a group of survivors, I guess, is what you call them, just a group of people to get over there. And there's kind of nobody else in that group. And you see Doc and Murphy doing this really like kind of co-leadership thing. And I think that was super interesting because you have Murphy, who's now becoming very sympathetic and like wanting to help people, which is kind of out of character for him. And Doc, who's always wanted to help people, but has always enjoyed doing like the more fun things, right? Like he's got his little brown bag and now he's got to make like tough leadership calls and he's trying to get people rallied and huddled and, it's like herding cats, like we say. And so he knows it's important, but he's not like having a lot of fun with it. And I think that there's like an interesting dynamic between the two of them balancing and trying to make co-decisions throughout the whole thing. So that was one thing that really stuck out to me at first was you have two sort of background leaders that have taken this full on role and had this own team and now they're, moving effectively. So and kind of keeping that like what would Warren do in the back of their head.
I love that you brought that up because I forgot about how this episode showed this new emergence of Murphy and Doc as leaders who could stand on their own. So in the past, we had talked about how like what happens when Warren leaves. And in some episodes, like when they thought they'd originally delivered Murphy to the CDC, Warren was like, all right, well, I'm out. And she left and everybody else was like, I guess they follow her. And so now it was like with her, when you have the leader, the main leader removed from a situation, it's just interesting how other people step up. And of course, I love the evolution of Murphy. I think he's just such an interesting character because you're right. Previously, this would have been out of character, but we have seen him go through this character arc of being really selfish because he was in fact forced into a situation that was not his own in a very traumatic fashion. Part of this group who were essentially taking care of him. And then he really evolved into then learning how to be a good team member and taking care of them back, which we saw in season 4. And now it's like he really is this unique voice and someone who should be in a leadership type position because he has felt what the Z's have felt. He understands like that side of it. He has been, kind of straddling that line between zombie and human, but he also has this deep connection to people in the group. And what I love about him and Doc also teaming up is that Doc was the first person who was really just nice to him in season 1. They were playing cards in the truck, and it just to see them now come together as a team. There are these two personalities who co-leadership is perfect for them, because then you don't have someone over indexing on too much kindness and too much fun, but also not too much like seriousness. Not that Murphy is like the most serious person. I think that Doc also brings out a lighter side of him.
Yeah, no, that was something that, like I said, really stuck out to me. And then I think the other thing that's interesting is the mutual respect that they have for each other, because then Murphy realizes that he wants to go figure out what happened to Warren, and I think he, has some brain, obviously he has the ability to see some visions every once in a while, so he starts to get these breadcrumbs and stuff, and hear some things about what had happened. He wants to go find her, and they reach literally a fork in the road, right? One way to New America, the other way to like the back to the zombie apocalypse, and they sort of split those separate ways. And that's fine, right? Like they're both cool with that, and I think that that's pretty neat that they co-lead and then realize that that's an important piece, and they split off, and that's fine. So that was that also really stuck out to me.
I think there's also such a confidence in one's skills and abilities to be able to leave a group, regardless of what position you are in that group. And obviously in the apocalypse, they've had many opportunities to discover their strengths. But it's like you said, they were very connected. They were making these co-leadership decisions. And then now to be like, okay, well, this is important to me. I understand that's important to you. I support you leaving. That's not important to me. I'm going to go this way. I think there's also if we were to look at it in our world, there is a professional maturity that comes with that. That is another thing that I think sometimes people are lacking. It becomes more about, and I'm painting with a very broad brush here, but it becomes more about like, oh, this person is so great on my team. I need to hoard this talent. I need to hoard these people, instead of being like, in that hoarding, you're suffocating them and you're not letting them explore and do the things that they want to do. You don't own these people. So I think that was something just really cool to see, where it was like and they're going to meet up again, probably, right? That's what's always happened with the group. Also, it's a TV show, but that will happen, right? And I don't want to sound like such a hippie when I say this, but like if you're meant to come back together, if there's a project that draws you back together, then so be it. But if not, don't stay in something when you're being pulled or called to do this other thing that you think is so important.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because now when we sort of flash in on Warren and what's going on with her, she's at this farm. There's a guy there. So her, she was in that drone last season, like we said, it crashed. He found her, he brought her in, he patched her up. She was hurt pretty bad. So she was asleep for a while. She woke up. And he's got this farm, right? And there's no zombies around, middle of nowhere, pretty normal. You know what I mean? He's got food, he's got fresh vegetables. And I think she has this moment. Nobody's relying on her. Nobody's looking at her. She's just a human again. It's another guy. She's just hanging out. They're eating food, and she's very wary of him, right? Obviously, because it's the apocalypse. But she starts to get to this point where she's very comfortable, and the mission's done. It's over. Now she can just sort of live her life like she's retired. And I thought it was interesting because she was like apprehensive about that, and then she needed that break, right? This is her vacation because she's been going since the apocalypse started. And she's happy to farm and just do it. And then you start to see this trail off of the vacation, and the first thing is they can't get the fields done by hand in time, right? So they need to go over to the neighbor, get the tractor, but the neighbors have all turned to zombies. So she's put back into that role, but she can operate very effectively in that role. And I thought that was interesting. She flipped the switch,
Absolutely. And I think that, I hope I didn't interrupt you because I saw you had to cough. There is such so Cooper, the man at the farm, he was able, the life that he created, the environment that he had set up was so consistent and so safe that for someone like, well, for anyone in that situation, you're like, yeah, we have food, we have this companionship, right? I've got someone to talk to. I'm not fighting zombies every day. So I like how you said it was kind of like that vacation or that retirement, because there are parts of us that we will settle into more quickly because we're safe, we feel safe, and because it offers consistency. And so while we can't necessarily create that in like a work environment all the time, like you can be as consistent as possible, but like the nature of the world is that things are changing and you need to adapt all the time. But to be able to, when you do go on vacation, when you do step away from work and you're with your family or whatever, to be able to create that safety, that peace, that consistency in that, because it is so replenishing and so recharging. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit previously, where it's like this leader self-care, where it's like, yeah, what are the things that I need to do over here that would ultimately make this thing more robust, and that also so that I don't have to bring those things to, you know, I can essentially compartmentalize in some ways in a healthy way that allows me to be 100% there for the things and the people that I want to be.
Well, I also thought it was interesting. It's yeah, fantastic point. I agree with you 100%. But I think it's also interesting because she's there alone, right, without anyone from Bite Mark, and she has gotten to a place or to the thing that they had all dreamed about getting to, which was what is a normal, right? There's no zombies. It's just she's just living life. And I think that there's a lot of different emotions. One, she's there without anyone. And I'm sure that there's some guilt that's, when you succeed and no one else does, sometimes it's a little bit of like that. I don't know what it is, survivor's guilt or whatever. And then I think the other thing too is there's like that exhaustion of going and going, and it's endless, and it's just zombie after zombie, right? Roadblock after roadblock. I think to finally get there, I think accepting that you made it, you can't always see that, right? You can't always accept it because it's never happened before. So to accept it now, and also, by the way, this guy that saved her and everything is a decent human being. She's met well, all of them, right? But they've all met so few decent human beings that that trust issue, you know what I mean? So it's like there's so many things there that she's got to fight through, right? And again, it's an hour-long episode, and somehow she manages to unpack all of that rather quickly. But it's wild, you know what I mean? It's absolutely wild the number of things that she's got to be dealing with and working through internally.
I think you bring up a really great point there too, where because of our past experiences, we have this professional baggage or emotional baggage that we're bringing into different things. And it makes us suspicious of things that we don't need to be suspicious of, but we don't know that when they first happen, right? So like there can be this thing. I know when I first started at my current job, my boss is amazing and very consistent, and I was sure it was a trap. And if the shoe was about to drop now, it was the long con, and she was going to get me later. So that was based on nothing that she has done. She's very consistent. She is a phenomenal human and a phenomenal supervisor. And it was me needing to work through that though, because it was like I hadn't had that before, at least not in the past decade. So it was that piece too, where it was like, I could have, and I absolutely do now, but I could have just immediately trusted her wholeheartedly right from the beginning. But because of just the things where everything was always a fight leading up to it, I was just like, you can't fool me, man. And so I think that a lot of us are like that, like I said, even needlessly sometimes.
Yeah, one of my big from my past life is one of my biggest triggers or anxieties is like the abstract, hey, can I talk to you after this or something? Just tell me what you need to talk to me about. Do it now, right? I will burn this building down. Let's have the conversation now, right? It's like, oh, I think that's so yeah, it's that baggage you bring forward with you, because sometimes people are just like, I've dealt with really nice, good leaders like my leadership team right now that I'm working with, great folks. We're about to go into a meeting. Somebody has a thought, and it's like, hey, can you remind me about this moment later on? Why? Was this moment you just said you're gonna fire me? Right? Like, nope. Let's end this meeting right now. Let's talk about what I need to remind you of. Right? Literally, just be like, oh, that guy's shirt was really funny or something. It's like
Yes.
nothing to do with anything. But and yeah, so that's a big trigger for me. But
Yeah. It is
um,
for a lot of people though, because like
yeah,
just to comment on that, I think that a lot of times also people, leaders specifically, when they try to give feedback, they gear it up like you said, we need to talk about this. Come to my office for this. Come here and let's talk about that. You can tell somebody what you're about to talk about, and that does not hurt anything. And I think we've talked about it before on the podcast. If you put somebody in a position to have an amygdala hijack, once that amygdala is hijacked, they cannot take in new information for the next 16 to 22 minutes. So everything you tell them is a moot point. So why would you put somebody in a position to feel mentally like it's fight or flight? You shouldn't. So what does it hurt to tell someone, I'd like to talk to you about this project. I think we need to change the deadline. When you come into this conversation, I'd like you to come with some thoughts that you have about it. And I will also be sharing some thoughts that I have about either a deadline that was missed or whatever. But you need to let people know that if you're going to fire them, you're just going to fire them. Like, that's just what that is. But if you let people know that coming into this, I want your thoughts too. This isn't just a directive conversation, and we're going to figure this out, not you go figure it out. But I think instead, a lot of people, leaders, unfortunately, will just like throw like a comment like that out, like, come talk to me after this. And like, all you've done is thrown a grenade into the environment. And now people are just spiraling. Why let people spiral? Like, what would you like? I always tell people, like, prepare someone how you would want to be prepared. What do you need to know going into this to give the best information, to represent what you've done so far or what your obstacles are? Because that's the other thing is if people come in with that defensive posture, they're also not going to tell you what the problems are, because then it's like, oh, well, I can't tell you the problems because you're going to fire me because I haven't resolved the problems. When instead, maybe the leader could literally make a call or do something that's like, don't even worry about that. Let me take that. So sorry, I know I got a soapbox on it, but like, I hate it when anybody does that, but especially when leaders do that. It is unnecessary for the environment. Is this not like, you're not the principal, nobody's in trouble. It's, you got to resolve it, and leaders need to be more active in that resolution process. And I'll stop talking.
no, it's great because I don't know if you have any other points, because like the next thing that I have is like, so Murphy finds Warren, right? And initially, and I don't know why his name just left my head, but I don't feel good, so that's my excuse.
Cooper?
Cooper, yes, thank you. Cooper, nope, nobody by that name here. You know what I mean? Like you got the wrong place. Move on. And that's very interesting because Warren, we know, sort of has some trust issues, and I didn't see him. I've watched the show a number of times now, and I remember the first time I watched the show, my gut read of that character was he was a good, honest dude, right? And so when he said that the first time I saw it, I was like, "Oh, this guy's crazy, right? He's just trying to keep her a prisoner." You know what I mean? I realize now, she had talked about Murphy and everything to him enough, opened up enough. He was trying to protect her. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't him. It wasn't the right call, but it was the right call in his mind. And like, I can respect that, right? It was the right call that I would make, but I respect that he thought it was the right call. But I guess, jumping forward a little bit as well, you had he had a family, right? He had a wife and a daughter and everything like that, who had turned in disease, and he could not mercy them, right? He couldn't bring himself to mercy it. And I thought that was so interesting was you had this new just you had Roberta turn back into Warren. You know what I mean? Like, it was, she flipped that switch and she took care of that for him when he wasn't strong enough, similar to what she did with Sarge, similar to what she did with a lot of other people along the way, right? So it's like, she's carried so much. She already carries so much of that weight. Like, it's like, what's one more straw, right? It's not going to break that camel's back type deal. And I thought that was immensely powerful. You know what I mean? So
Yes, there's this line where you can really like I'm going to translate this into like the workplace real quick. You can really like the people that you work with, and you can come to a point where you care about them so much that it blinds you to what actually needs to happen. And so I think that's really what happened there with Cooper. Now, of course, different type of relationship and all of that, but with Cooper, he cared about Warren so much that he didn't want to see her hurt. He also probably didn't want to lose her, right?
yeah.
Like Murphy presented a very unique threat where it wasn't a threat to life, but it was a threat to status. It was a threat to the consistency and the environment that he had built. So, and it was a threat to his feelings for Warren. And so I think sometimes in the workplace, though, not like in the romantic sense, but like when we are friends with people and such, there are people who don't know how to separate that. And then things get dicey and they get weird when decisions have to be made. Because in the workplace, if something isn't good for the business, it doesn't matter how much I like you. It really doesn't. But people will just desperately claw at this, like, but they're a good person, but they're this and that. Okay, but there's no business need for this anymore. And it is literally now them staying in this role or us keeping this group together is hurting the business. It does not feed into our strategy. It doesn't do any of these things. So that's why I thought, like, when he met Murphy, yeah, my first thought was like, also, oh, this guy is trying to trap her. He is selfish and he doesn't want to lose her. But then, yeah, being able to like kind of step back is like, yeah, but what does Murphy represent? That other job opportunity, that, you know, recruiter from another company, like they represent these things, or Murphy represented these things that were essentially a change to the status that Cooper had created and the feelings that he had for Warren. So yeah, that was a lot.
No, it's so valid too, because I was thinking about it, like, Warren is an asset to his survival as well. Like, getting that tractor or combine or whatever it is. He saved her, she saved him for sure, right? There's a couple times, but the whole point is neither of them would have been able to get it alone, and that, you know, is going to increase their ability to farm and make food and take care of themselves and get. So it's like she serves value, you know, and doesn't want to lose that value to that team. So that's a great point too. I didn't even think about that.
So then Warren does go back with Murphy and they're reunited. It's Doc and 10K and Lily, and they're all at this place called Altura. And we also meet this new character who is one of my favorite characters on the show, and that's George. And so I'll kick it over to you because I know there were some things with George and Warren's backstory that were impactful for you.
Yeah, so it's not the first thing, but I think it's the first thing of substance for what we want to talk about is when they see each other at the like kind of control gate to this, you know, safe zone area. Is George and Warren have a history, and their history goes back to the day one, right? Day zero almost, of Warren as Lieutenant, you know, Warren clearing out of college, and George is a college student who's there and just scared. And what I thought was so interesting about that flashback is Warren. I loved that Warren has always been who she is, like in the sense of like a strong leader. And this was very early on with the zombie apocalypse thing. She was, like, she was pointed, she was direct, she was trying to help her. She went back for her, you know, she lived all those values that she had about trying to keep people safe. And what I think is interesting was they rubbed off on each other so much that it was actually George who'd come up with the idea of the puppies and kittens, right? Which we've talked about throughout the whole thing, where she was like, you know, she's scared of them, so she used to call them puppies and kittens for zombies. But that Warren was the same Warren that you see today. So like those values and compass that stayed pointed true the entire time. And I thought that was crazy. And George, by contrast, when you met her in that flashback, just a kid, very quiet, just trying to survive, right? Puppies and kittens, afraid of everything. And now when you see George, she's a very commanding leader. She's a strong person, and it's like she still remembers Warren as well. And it's very easy. I mean, to kind of paint it out, it's a TV show. We know this, right? But it's like Warren made George, you know what I mean? And George also kind of made Warren a little bit. So that was like my favorite thing about that is you had just that one interaction was enough to completely change one person's trajectory, probably a lot. Warren's, you just concreted what were already good established skills. But
Yeah. You said that wasn't the first thing. What was the first thing?
with Warren and George, or
So I mentioned Warren and George, and you said, oh, and I mentioned their backstory, and you said, oh, that's not the first thing. So what was the first thing?
so the first thing well, with George, my first thing is also like a continuing thing because that happened a little bit beginning middle-ish of the episode, right? Was George, as you meet her, she meets Murphy and Doc first, right? As they're going forward into the thing. And so they have their group of survivors that they're carrying on. And we're introduced to this new concept of a new type of zombie called a talker, which comes out post Black Rain, which is where people like they don't turn into zombies right away. If they do unalive, right? If they do just for anything, they still act like a human, right? Like they don't realize that they're not alive anymore, nor does anyone else. And it's like this slow degrade that can be stopped or reversed by these biscuits, right? And they run into this the team runs into this group of like folks just sitting on the road, and George comes in when she realizes this, when they're trying to do something. She's like, no, wait, that's not how we deal with this anymore. And it's like talking through everything. And it's just like, wow, man, this chick is, pretty awesome. And I think it's cool that her likeness kind of looks like when they're trying to pick the new president for New America and everything, it sort of looks like her. And yeah, that was the first thing where it's like, okay, all right, I see you, George. Where are you coming from?
Yeah, her character, I think, embodies so many great leadership things. This embodiment of hope, also this phenomenal emotional intelligence, this willingness to listen and potentially have her mind changed, and not just listening to like respond. Like they do have her position, and she's talking about voting, right? She's talking about all these different like political things. She does not present as what we would say is the stereotypical negative like politician type, but very much this like what we all would want a politician to be. And I'm sure there are some out there, but it's that whole like, I am listening to you. What is important to you? How do we resolve this? Like very much mediator and meeting the moment in like the best possible way. So yeah, I think she comes out the gate as a super strong, like you said, commanding leader type, and people like her. And it's because she cares, right? So yes, she presents as a leader, but I think one of the most understated qualities of leadership is just truly caring about other people. And when you genuinely care and then you take actions because of that, you're not just listening. You're not just like a therapist who's like, just, okay, tell me all this stuff, but who then is like, now let's take action. Here's how you do this. I do this. We do this together. So yeah, she comes out the gate as a really strong leader, and it's just immediately likable in that realm.
Question for you. A little abstract, but do you think that she is more likable, or for the sake of the argument, right? We're going to say she's a better leader than Warren.
Okay.
Do you think she's a better leader because her skills were forged in the current environment, being that she became a leader in the zombie apocalypse, or Warren was the leader before the zombie apocalypse? So all of George's experiences are based solely on the problems that exist now, where Warren has to mold her tool set, right? Her leadership tool set to the current problems, where George's was built on the current problem set. Does that make sense?
It does. And so, yeah, I don't want to give you a cop-out answer. So I would say in this regard, for what George is trying to do, she is a better leader than Warren. Like, she will be able to assume these different positions of authority and power, potentially a presidency, whereas Warren would be less likely to do that. Like, George has the skills to almost be like more of the strategic leader, whereas Warren has those skills to be the on the ground, like, let's actually get this stuff done type of leader. And of course, now I'll give you the cop-out answer, which is they're equal but different, right? They have very different missions. Warren can pivot in a way that George probably can't. Warren can adapt in a way that George probably can't. That George would just need, she'd get there, she just wouldn't be able to get there as quickly, whereas Warren can pivot in the moment and change something and keep people on board when these things are just the worst. And I'm not saying George can't do that, but we've seen Warren's skills and her successes and her failures kind of along the way here. But I really like the point that you brought up too, where it's like the environment shapes people, and what we enter that environment with also shapes how that journey is going to turn out. I know a lot of companies, when they think about like the leadership journey or leadership development, it's ultimately to get people into succession plans so that when the executives leave, there's someone else to step in. But the reason why that isn't, there's not just like this, magic, the silver bullet that's going to, resolve everything, is because of this exact type of thing. George would be the perfect CEO, right? Because she came in, she was built in this company and this environment. And so she understands all the nuance. She understands how to be emotionally intelligent in that arena. But would George be able to lead in the way that Warren does in the environment that Warren was in? I don't think so. She'd do fine, but she wouldn't be Warren level. And so, yeah, then you have somebody like Warren who comes in already with, I was a leader somewhere else, or I was doing this other thing, and now I'm in this environment and I can adapt to it. Could she also be at the executive level? Yes, but also just be a very different path. And it might even take her longer because of that whole piece of, I came in with all this other experience and baggage, which is valuable, but also could be hindering at certain levels.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the right leader at the right time, right? So that probably plays a key role too. But because I think it's interesting, you have this other guy that I think we met him before. I think we met him at Zona, but you have Roman, right?
Mhm.
Who's the back end guy who's doing a lot of the, I can call it like a city planner almost, right? So he's doing some infrastructure-y kind of things, and he's this like sort of sideline, right, that George talks to and is working with. So they're kind of like semi co-leading, right? Loose association thing there. But one of the things that I really value about George is Roman's kind of very pointed and a little cold and crass, where George is very much like, let me hear your problem. Let me tell you what I think I just heard. Let's talk through this, like a much better process. For communicating. So
Yes, it's very interesting to see her and Roman. And sometimes I think that there's that element too of like when you have multiple leaders, maybe not everybody's the CEO or the general or whatever, but when you have multiple leaders, the smart ones will understand, like somebody like Roman, and I'm not saying he did this, but would understand that it's like, oh yeah, I don't like talking to people. Maybe I don't like these people at all, but I do like this mission, right? I do like this organization or this company. So how do I supplement what I'm not good at? You find somebody like George, right? And even like with somebody like George, Roman has that, he's the planner. He's a different type of visionary than she is, where he's more transactional, she's more relational. But to have two people like that and kind of like on equal footing can be really valuable, because then you're driving everything forward, not just this people side, which is not going to inherently lead to anything, unfortunately, because there needs to be a mission behind it. And then somebody who can drive forward, just like, what are the results? What's measurable? What's this? And then the combination of the two could be that magic potion.
Yeah, that's yeah, I think like because they're not, like I said, it's interesting to me because they are not anything yet, right? Like they are leaders, but like I said, it's that loose association thing because we find out. I think I'm putting the cart before the horse there, but that's not it. But yeah, so they're coming from different places, they're coming from different environments, they're working effectively because they do, and it goes back to that thing again about being clear cut about your goals and communication, right? We have some pretty easy prime directives here, make people safe. They've put in some processes in place at the front gate, right? It's managing and maintaining those. So there's like these little supplemental processes. They're not really faced with any large conflicting challenges yet, right? There's challenges to just running the day-to-days, but nobody disagrees with that it needs to happen anyway. So I think that's like really interesting with this piece. So but coming back again, speaking about the gate and everything, when George and Warren first meet, so we talked about sort of that flashback piece. Again, there's some issues at the gate because Murphy, they want him to go to scientists and doctors, and we know that he's not super keen on that. Doesn't have the best track record. And George comes in and kind of vouches for them strictly because she knows Warren.
And this is also another piece where you had Murphy, who was a pale gray and became blue, then became a regular, Caucasian skinned person. Now he's turning a different color. So he really can't catch a break. And he just always looks, he consistently throughout the whole television show has looked some color that is not what you would call a healthy color.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that like what's funny is so George is like, she understands it. She said, like I said, I think the conflict resolution that she had in that little moment is like, it's worth like going back and just like watch that. Like it'd be great, like a plug-in for training or something. You know what I mean? Too, is because Murphy's freaking out. People are getting a little bit more aggressive. They've got like armed guards there. George comes in, diffuses it. What's the problem, right? Talk me through it. This is what I'm hearing. I understand. I value and respect and believe in your opinions and your feelings. But listen, this is why we have this process. It's to protect everyone else. What if we meet in the middle? What if instead of doing that, what if you have this person go with you? And it was just all straight kind of textbook, generic conflict resolution. Like it was so well done. And that was huge in my opinion. And then Warren ends up not having to do any of it anyway. So, we're fine. It's crazy.
Well, again, it's just interesting where when you have different leaders and leaders who, I don't need to be the most leadery leader, right? Like George has this, let George have this. Warren could have stepped in. Absolutely. Didn't see the need to. And I think there's a maturity that comes with leadership in that regard as well, where it's like, I don't always have to be the one breaking things up. If other people have got it, just let them have it. Like you don't need to jump in until you need to jump in. And in which case there's also a certain amount of like, let some of the stressors of the environment, see if it pushes people together, because sometimes it will, maybe half the time it will. And then the other half it won't. And so you do need to step in, but you got to let people try to figure it out too, because if you're not there, then what happens? The whole thing falls apart. Then you're inherently an ineffective leader anyway, because then they can only lead in your presence. And that's not great leadership.
Yeah. It's a great point. I was trying to think of something to say about that, but now you just got me thinking.
That's really great podcast content, by the way.
You're welcome. Yeah, no, sorry.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Well, I was just because it comes back to right, people have their strengths and their weaknesses, and it's kind of that fall forward, fall back, like, or like you move to the front when you can lead from the front effectively, and when you can't and there's someone else that can, stepping back and doing that. And I think it's interesting because I think it's a twofold, uh there's two parties involved there, right? There's the leadership team that has to be mature enough to do that and handle that and be capable of functioning on that. So like being okay with being the leader and then stepping back and being like an effective follower. But then there are the folks that maybe aren't necessarily on that hypothetical leadership team that are just members of the team, like them being okay with having different voices telling them what to do, right? So there's like sort of a lack of consistency there from the individual, but if you can be consistent in your messaging, like, can that still remain effective? I was just trying to think if I've ever dealt with that before, and I haven't. Sorry, yeah, I got lost on my mind there, but I don't feel super good, so that's
No worries. But yeah, so again, another great episode. This is season 5 is probably my favorite season, just because we do get to see a lot of different things like this emerge, a lot of different leadership types, how they come together. And so, yeah, I am excited for the rest of these conversations too. So we